Did the name Epstein ever cross your desk?
Depends whether you mean my desk in government or my desk in private business since 2009.
Let's go with government first.
That's the one I can't talk about. But certainly in private business it did, and it was linked very strongly with Russia.
In what way?
In the sense that the whole Epstein files, as they're coming out, are showing the extensive connections between Epstein and Russia. And I would argue this goes right back to the 1970s. My sources in America tell me that the American government, the American intelligence services assessment was that Epstein was recruited as early as the 1970s by Russian organised crime figures in New York, and that his information was being used, his operational techniques were being used from that point onwards. So this scandal, this case, if you like, goes back decades.
So your information is that Epstein was indeed recruited to act on behalf of Russian mobsters or the Russian state?
Well, of course, the two are interlinked.
Quite.
Initially in New York, obviously, offshore, it's Russian mobsters, but Russian mobsters were always umbilically linked to the Russian intelligence services. And that relationship actually has got a lot closer over time. One of the things Putin did when he came to office was effectively took over the FSB, the security service in Russia, took over organised crime as part of Putin's consolidation of state power in his hands. So this is one side or two sides of the same coin, basically.
Was this endeavour by Epstein and to an extent Maxwell done in order to gain compromat on senior figures within the British hierarchy, whether that's a senior government minister in Mandelson or a prince?
I believe this started, for what you're referring to, the Maxwell-Epstein relationship. I'm not sure. I would refer to Robert Maxwell as the key figure here in the past, not Ghislaine. I think Ghislaine met Epstein through Robert Maxwell. But I think Epstein was in business with Robert Maxwell in the late 1980s. And what they were doing at the time, ostensibly, was Maxwell was getting Jewish people, Soviet Jews, out of Russia into Israel. My sources tell me, both in America and independently, that the other side of that, the quid pro quo for it, was that they were laundering Soviet Communist Party hard currency into the West, and that Epstein was clearly recruited as part of that operation.
That's where Epstein, you say, got the money from to pay the flights, accommodation, transportation of Russian, potentially Russian young women.
Yes, what is quite curious is that my American contacts tell me that despite the fact that Epstein was incredibly rich and influential and omnipresent, if you like, in American high society, is he didn't actually do many big banking or financial deals. So the implication of that is that the money was coming from somewhere else, and I believe it was coming from the Soviet Union initially and then Russia.
Do you suspect, to what extent do you know, that included within Epstein's files, including on his computer somewhere, is severely damaging, incredibly embarrassing behaviour by the current president of the United States?
I think it's quite likely, although I suspect that some of these files have been destroyed. One of the interesting aspects of this is that if the American security services knew that this was initially a Russian operation and was a continuing Russian operation over the years, why did they let it run so long? I find that mysterious. I think other intelligence services were also involved, the Israelis almost certainly.
In what way?
Well, in the sense that if you like, the modus operandi, the value of the compromat that was being gathered must have been so great that it was attractive to more than just the Russian intelligence services.
The Polish government say that they are investigating any links between Epstein and the Russian intelligence services. Prime Minister Tusk saying more and more leads, more and more information, and more commentary in the global press all relate to the suspicion that this unprecedented paedophilia scandal was co-organised by Russian intelligence services. Do you think the British government needs to do that, or, if we're honest, Christopher, have already done that investigation?
Well, I left government in 2009, so I can't say for sure. I think the Polish position has to be taken very seriously. Poland is a very good, if you like, assessor of Russia's intentions and Russia's operations. And if the Polish government and the Polish intelligence services think that the Russians were behind this, then I think we need to investigate that as well here, because they are good allies and they are reliable allies and they understand Russia as well as anybody.
Why, in theory, would an intelligence service allow this, let's say it is Russian-backed Compromat creating web, to continue?
Well, obviously the Russians would want it to continue because they were gaining value from it.
Yes, but why would the British security services or the Americans?
The American security services baffle me because, as I say, the other thing that baffles me is the fact that clearly the Department of Justice in America had this material at its disposal for the last several years on Epstein. They don't seem to have shared that with British security services when the Mandelson appointment came up. And given that Mandelson was actually going to be ambassador to the US and would, in that role, also have access to sensitive US information, I find it baffling that that wasn't the case.
Do you think, to what extent do you think it is true that the Prime Minister would not have known about the extent of the relationship between Mandelson and Epstein?
I wouldn't like to comment on that. I can't because I haven't been in the system. I think that clearly it was known that Mandelson had a relationship with Epstein for many years. And in my view, that should have been enough to prevent him getting that particular job, which is a highly sensitive ambassadorial job.
And yet here is a potential Russian asset being invited to tea parties in Buckingham Palace by a senior member of the royal family.
Yeah, it's quite head-spinning, isn't it? I find it absolutely baffling that that wasn't also clamped down upon at the time, but I don't really want to comment further.
Appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Christopher Steele is former head of the MI6 Russia desk, director of Orbis Business Intelligence.